Right, we're moving into our third session, and here we want to look at how using technology can transform health and research in the charity sector, and we're going to do that by hearing from 4 examples of how charities are improving patient care and experience through innovation. And those 4 charities are Alzheimer's Research UK, Arthritis Research UK, Autistica and Fight for Sight. So without further ado, and because there are 4 speakers, if I can ask you to stick rigorously to the time you have been allotted, that would be very helpful. I'm really pleased to welcome Tim Parry, who's Director of Communications and Brand at Alzheimer's Research UK, who's going to be talking about gamifying your research, the C Hero Quest. Tim.
Right. Hello everyone, yes, I'm Tim Parry, Director of Communications, Alzheimer's Research UK, and I'm also a bit paranoid at the moment, having gone through this morning's sessions and listened to the amazing clarity of thought and process that goes into lots of digital and technology pieces. And I'm paranoid that did we put the same thought process into this project? I think my answer to that is perhaps not consciously, but I think subconsciously a lot of the themes that we've been exploring today helpfully did come to the fore nonetheless. So the shameless plug first, Alzheimer's Research UK is the UK's leading dementia research charity. We've got about £33 million worth of research going on at universities across the UK and internationally. And we work with governments and industry to improve the research environment for our scientists and hopefully to improve outcomes for people living with dementia. And we also help the public to understand dementia, the research that's taking place, to take part in studies themselves and to be part of that research process, that research effort. So as the introduction suggested, we're going to be talking about C Hero Quest today, and that's a project that's directly at the interface, helpfully, between the research that we deliver as a funder and this role we have in helping people to get involved in dementia research and understand and process themselves. But just to go back a little bit in time, we as a charity were quite interested in the concept of citizen science. Because again, like the slide just showed, it's that fantastic intersection between the research, the hard research that you fund, and involving people in that process. So we've been kicking around ideas of what we might do at Alzheimer's Research UK to move into this space. And these are some of the kind of concepts and thoughts that we were asking ourselves as we were exploring this territory. The first one of those is if we were going to deliver a citizen science project, it would have to have something that had genuine scientific utility, actually made a difference to the research process and wasn't just done for fun, but fun was still an important part of it. What we didn't want to do is create something that people kind of felt sorry for, and a few people would play it because of their personal circumstances. If this kind of thing is going to make a difference, you've got to be able to deliver it at scale and at a decent quality. And the other thing we found is that I think the idea of creating something around citizen science for biomedical research is particularly challenging. And when we were looking around, we went to some conferences on the subject. There's huge amounts of stuff going on in environmental science. So, citizen science is most typically summed up by that picture, kids looking for newts and testing air quality levels and water quality and all this kind of stuff, which is great. It gets communities involved in environmental science and makes a difference. But it's trickier to try and construct an idea that people can participate in around biomedical research. So it's fair to say we're struggling with that a little bit. And there's obviously lots of different ways you can deliver a citizen science concept. You can create a game. You can create an experiment in which people take part. You can use latent power of games consoles like Sony did with Folding at Home. You can get personal data from people. You can get people to wear wearables. All sorts of different avenues that you can explore for your research to involve the public and people affected by conditions. And if you were looking to answer a scientific need, and the answer to that would be around collecting large quantities of data, once again, if you're going to create a concept, it has to be something super engaging and super interesting for the public to get involved with. So we were kicking around all these ideas and all these thoughts. We were having some conversations with scientists, began to get a few balls rolling. But meanwhile, over in Bonn, in Germany, Deutsche Telekom were having some interesting ideas of their own around corporate social responsibility. So what they wanted to do, big global telecoms companies, I'm sure you'll know, they wanted to do a corporate social responsibility piece that played to their strengths and their assets as a company, but applied that to an unmet health need. So it won't be a surprise that the assets that they have as a company are huge networks of connected people on mobile devices. So they were wondering how they could harness this kind of power to answer this a unmet health need. And they engaged with Saatchi & Saatchi, their agency over here in London, to help them to undertake that piece of thinking. And they were particularly drawn to games from the beginning because they spotted that we spend 3 billion hours every week playing mobile games around the world, on the bus, on the way to work, on the loo. You know, this is all potential access to people providing data and providing computational power that's sitting there waiting to be taken advantage of. So when they looked at all these unmet health needs, they had to look at dementia, and that's how they arrived at our door. And we convinced them, and as strongly as we possibly could, that yes, dementia is something that they should be looking at and turning their attentions to. But the challenge still remained: how do you gamify dementia research? So our process for getting ideas together was actually to go out to the field. We went out to universities around the UK, and we talked to scientists about what data they were missing, what challenges they were trying to solve, and they submitted their ideas to us, and we ended up with a whole bunch of ideas from different quarters of the field that could potentially be turned into a gaming concept that people could take part in. So we looked at analysing brain scans, looking for atrophy, that's brain shrinkage that people experience during dementia, measuring protein build-up in cerebral spinal fluid, and looking at plaques. These are damaging protein plaques that build up in diseases like Alzheimer's, looking at those in imaging. All these ideas had something about them, but how you gamify that, it was looking a bit clunky. We couldn't quite make any of those ideas work. But then we got an idea through from scientists, a duo of scientists based at UCL and then at the University of Cambridge. And they were a team looking at spatial navigation. And their idea for how we could bring together a citizen science game was to answer the question of whether a lot of the spatial navigation tests that they perform in the laboratory space, whether they could be delivered digitally and at scale. You can see a few of the diagrams of the kind of navigation tests we're talking about. Why does this help dementia? Well, people with dementia experience problems with spatial navigation, and that can mean difficulties finding their way around their city or their town, and in their neighbourhood, and even ultimately around the house or the room that they may be in at the time. So these problems can get quite profound. But the progress of those problems starts very early on in a disease process for that person. So the idea of being able to detect those problems with spatial navigation very early is interesting because it could potentially aid early diagnosis for people and get them access to treatments earlier than ever before. But in order to detect those problems with greater sensitivity, we need to understand what normal looks like, what healthy navigation looks like across the population. And actually, we don't really know that at the moment. The biggest laboratory study of its kind across a healthy population looking at spatial navigation featured 599 people. It's not quite indicative of the population at large. So could we create a way of attaining this data at scale? So this became a scientific brief, a scientific challenge that needed solving, that became a brief that we could then give out to game designers for them to apply their creativity and their thinking to turn that into a game product. So we sent that brief to a bunch of game designers, maybe 10 or a dozen, and then it was a really intense day or two where they came before us and they presented all their different ideas of how they could apply kind of gaming architecture over the top of this scientific challenge. Ultimately, that pitch was won by a games company called Glitchers with a concept that at the time they called Catch Hero. This is some early mock-up prototypes from what they created. So as you can see, it's a boat game. You pilot a boat around different waterways and you pick up markers. And it's really simple and elegant, and you can play it with one finger. So it's simple to play. The confounding factors were kept to a minimum because it's very intuitive to access. So this was their approach, and we quite like that and its simplicity. But again, because you've got to make it appealing, people have got to want to play it. It's got to look cool. So we had a fantastic period of a couple of months where we designed monsters and desert islands and the boat itself, which you can You can make whatever colour you want and give it a name. Can you imagine what name people might want to call a boat? There weren't enough characters for Boaty McBoatface, actually. So yeah, we've got some great designers and great creators in place to put together a package around the whole thing. And we ended up with Sea Hero Quest, and that's the product that we launched in May last year. I can give you a quick snapshot with a video promo of it now, I hope. So there you go. I would forgive all of you for looking down at your phones if you want to download it. It is free to download from the Play Store and the Apple App Store, so do download that, not when other speakers are going on, obviously. So here's a snapshot of what we actually collect as people play it. So when you play the first 2 levels of the maze game, we're looking at your visual motor skills, and then we have levels that look at path integration, and sailors call this dead reckoning. This is the ability to trace your steps back from where you started off, and we do that with a flare level. The majority of the levels are about wayfinding, so picking up checkpoints and memorising maps. And we have a radial maze task that we introduce later on in the process as well, which is about systematic decision making in navigation. And we also have a level where you take photos of monsters that has absolutely zero scientific purpose. It's just to keep people playing it. It's that balance between keeping people interested, having fun, and keeping them playing the game. So we couple this with some opt-in demographic data that people give when they first pick up the game. 3 simple questions. What is your age? What is your sex? And what country do you live in? And we'll come back to this, but the balance between the scientist's desire to find out absolutely every last detail, and blood type and inside leg measurement about the person who's using it, balanced up with not wanting to scare people off. That was an interesting tension throughout. After we launched, we introduced some new levels a couple of months later, which we estimated would be played by people who were quite keen on the whole project and had gone through all the levels that we provided in the first place. So we took the chance of introducing a load more demographic data on the hope / understanding that more people would fill it in at that stage, and that was the case. It did all right. 2.5 million people played it, and you know, the savings in terms of time and money for conducting this kind of research in a standard laboratory environment is just colossal. I mean, I don't know, that figure is vaguely indicative, $30 million, but you know, we'd never got anywhere close to getting this amount of data in that amount of time, and that was really special. And I'm conscious that I'm probably talking to a few scientists in the room, but the guys from UCL and UEA who were working on this were jumping up and down a little bit in the room, so they were very enthusiastic about what they were seeing. And we were really enthused as well that 2/3 of people did choose to opt in and give their personal data, so we can get a much richer understanding of the data we're collecting. And these are a few early outcomes from the data as we see it. So we knew there's a slight bias towards male players, and the graph on the side is not very easy to see, unfortunately, but this gives you an idea of the age profile of people who played it. Not a great surprise that there was a greater proportion of younger people playing it, but we did still get tens of thousands of people across the ages, so it really does give us that snapshot of the population as a whole. One of the early things we're beginning to see from the data, this is not yet published, only oral presentations at conferences to date, but our path integration, this dead reckoning ability, actually starts to decrease from our early 20s onwards, which is a bit of a harrowing idea. And I need to be very careful about how I say the next point, because the scientists were very particular about this, but males appear to have an advantage in navigation. So you can interpret that how you like. Another thing we found as well, just an interesting observation, was that players in Nordic and Antipodean countries seem to perform particularly well. Just a few words on what we're doing next with this project. So we've already adapted the game for use in the clinic at UEA, which means it shuts it down. The data doesn't get fed into the cloud. It's viewable there in the clinic itself. And as we get a greater, more detailed picture of what our 2.5 million player benchmark looks like, we can begin to compare the behaviour of people with dementia within the app to that database. We're looking at the potential for a virtual reality expansion for the game. I'm quite into VR. If everyone's had a go on our VR app out in the foyer, so we're just looking at that now. Papers will follow, and we're going to make the data. Ultimately, it's going to be open source, so everyone can interrogate that as well. And we think ultimately, hopefully, we're on a path to perhaps creating what we would describe as a kind of culturally neutral diagnostic tool. One of the problems with approaches to diagnosis of dementia at the moment is that they're written and they may not work in every culture, and may not work where literacy is at low levels, but the idea of navigating a boat from A to B makes as much sense in London as it does in Lisbon or anywhere else in the world. So it has the potential to be a simple part of our diagnostic armoury. So just to finish off on a few considerations for you if you're looking to go into this world. As I mentioned earlier, we actually found that slight tension between the gamers who know what people want to play and the scientists and what they need to get out. That tension was actually quite healthy, because you end up with hopefully a product that's in the sweet spot of those two, that works hard in both directions. As I probably alluded to, keep your data collection light. Don't scare people with trying to get every single last detail about their health and lifestyle, because they won't want to give it to you. And also, can you get the data? Can you get useful data out of a gaming app quickly? If people got to play for 6 months and complete 4,000 levels, then your drop-off will be massive, and you won't get enough data at scale. Important for us as a medical research charity exclusively funded by voluntary donations, we have to be able to demonstrate how this kind of project actually leads us towards benefiting patients. So always keep your eye on how it's going to change the world. And this is easy to say, and I spoke to a few people about this during the breaks, but we were only able to do this in partnership with Deutsche Telekom. I think it can be difficult with the kind of budgets that we in charities command to go too far into this territory, but my impression, having done this with Deutsche Telekom, and the number of people who are now coming to us to say that they want to work in this space, is that there really are opportunities out there. So if you can find an unmet scientific need, you can get some ideas on begin to prototype a product. My impression is that there are partners out there who would be willing to go in and make that kind of thing happen for you. So thank you very much.
Great.